Today's tutor is Portrait Artist of the Year winner Gareth Reid, who caught the attention of us judges with charcoal drawings of broadcaster Adrian Chiles and actress Imelda Staunton. He further impressed with portraits of actor Tom Courtenay and High Court Judge Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb.
It's just fantastic.
This is an absolutely exquisite finished piece of art.
Winning him a commission to paint broadcaster and comedian Graham Norton for the National Gallery of Ireland. In 2023, he created a tender and serene portrait of actor Dame Judi Dench, which secured him the title Portrait Artist of the Decade.
Gareth Reid.
Known for his calculated approach to portraiture,
it's a bit like trying to solve an equation that you don't really know the answer to, but it's exciting because everything's open.
Gareth will be sharing the techniques behind his thoughtful process in today's masterclass, Building a Portrait.
Today we're going to look at how to build a drawing, how to take it slowly, not jump the gun too much, get bogged down in details too soon. We're going to look at how to build a structure early on so we've got a good foundation to create a likeness later on. What I've done is I've put my source material, my reference photograph, right on the easel beside my drawing. So I can compare directly from one to the other without a big head movement. So we're going to start loosely and lightly, not committing too many heavy solid lines to the drawing too soon, so we keep it movable. So today I'm going to use charcoal. What we do when we're standing at the easel holding the charcoal is hold it, instead of a writing grip, we use a drawing grip, what I call a drawing grip, which means that you're holding the charcoal like this and it's very, very light in your hand. So you can make light strokes, not heavy strokes like this, okay? I'm standing back at arm's length so I can compare easily. I'm going to start with this side of the photograph here. I feel like that's a good anchor point here. So I'm going to start. I'm not committing a complex line. I'm just doing soft, vague lines. So anything that's big and obvious that I can see, the side of the head, side of the cheekbone here, hairline, anything that's kind of obvious, I'm going to focus on first. When I draw like this, I'm kind of feeling my way around the face. So I know where the cheek line is. It's somewhere around here, and so I'm making there may be 10 lines there. Eventually, as the drawing progresses, I'll arrive at one line. But to start with, it's a broad line. It's broad marks, and I know it's in there somewhere. But the key is not committing too soon. You don't have to nail it first time. So I'm keeping it broad and loose. Obviously, choosing a reference photo is very, very important because that's the content of what your drawing is going to be. The photographs that I'm looking for have got some kind of animation in their expression there. There's a bit of a spark there. The expression isn't dead. There's something happening, some kind of life in the expression. So that's kind of why I've chosen this one here, because I just feel like there's a bit of life behind the eyes. There's something going on there. It adds some interest to the portrait. I'm trying to create a structure at all the bits are arriving at the same time. So I'm not accelerating ahead with an eye, for instance, or any of the features. I'm just purely trying to make structure and put in all the salient parts. So I'm marking roughly where I think the nose is. I'm going to stand back. That's another thing about the drawing being on the same page as your source material. You can stand back and compare directly. So where's the nose? It's kind of around here. Where's the mouth? Here. So the mouth is at a slight angle down the way. Same with the chin, it's roughly here. Eyebrows are kind of going up at an angle. I think there's strong lines here, here, and here. So I want to put those in as a kind of marker point. At the moment, I've got top of the forehead, the hairline. I've got where the eyebrows are. I've got the bottom of the nose. I've got the jawline. I've got the chin. And I've got the mouth. So I'm building up slowly a lot of the elements that make a face. This is the foundation. If the foundation is good, then the rest of the drawing can be good as well. Today I'm working on paper with charcoal, and it's a vine charcoal, which is kind of semi-soft, but it's sharpenable. So I've been able to sharpen it to a fine point. Other charcoals, willow charcoal, you can sharpen it, but it maybe doesn't maintain a point like that. So that's the key. That's why I use this charcoal all the time. So it almost becomes like as sharp as a pencil. So you can work in a refined way, but also in a broad way as well. And then also, because it's a bit softer, it works on this medium toothed paper, which means it's slightly rough. If it's smoother, it's harder for charcoal to kind of adhere to it. The thing about charcoal is that it's easy to remove as well. So you can, I work with two kinds of rubbers. So putty rubber, which is moldable, so you can make it into a point, and also a little retractable rubber, which is good for kind of finer mark making. Also, I think about rubbers not just for mistakes. I think of them as a drawing tool. So mark making, eventually, if you want to take off a layer, you can use that almost like the reverse of a piece of charcoal, a pencil. This rubber is actually probably 20 years old. I got it when I studied in Florence for a while, for about 6 months, and I've had it ever since, and I can't find one as good as it, so it's stayed with me. So yeah, that's how long it lasts, 20 years. So yeah, my faithful rubber. I think drawing's the thing that everyone starts with, and it was kind of the thing that I just kind of kept going with. It was always a very, very important part of my, when I started art, it was kind of the main thing that I did. And then for a while, when I became a professional artist, there was a period when it was all I did for about, I think, 3 or 4 years or something. I didn't do any painting at all. I just drew for the entire time. I took my inspiration from Seurat, who I'd heard that he just drew for years and years and years, and made that his foundation for his painting. And I would say that I probably struggled with painting back then. So drawing was it was just something I felt I had a handle on, and it became really an intrinsic part of what I did then and what I do now. So if you notice at the moment, it's all the elements in the face that have the same level of simplicity or complexity. That's the way I like it to be. Everything emerges at the same rate. I don't want anything to go ahead of the other, because you can. It's easier just to kind of keep the balance of the drawing. So everything is done in a very, very simple geometric way at the minute, but we're getting more complexity, and we're seeing the little shapes inside the bigger ones. We are seeing a little bit more detail, nostrils, for instance, corners of the mouth, the slope of the eyelid. It's just growing in complexity, and that's the way I like it to be. So these lines on the left-hand side of the drawing here, they started broad and simple. So for instance, the one on the jawline, the cheek line, instead of being something that's broad and made up of a line that goes like this and then a line that goes like this. It's now starting to become a bit more complex. At some point, I can say that the actual edge of the face at the eye socket is here. I can kind of be quite purposeful about that. As this line goes down, it comes out slightly for the cheekbone, comes in a little bit, changes here again, and then there's another line underneath there. So it's just, we're getting to a point where it's progressing in complexity. All these lines are progressing in complexity. We can start to make proper decisions. If you look at the nose here, it's not just one line the way I started off drawing it. There's a little bit of a bump here, and then it becomes a straighter line. And then if we look at the eye socket, there's certain lines which are very, very strong lines. So like inside the cheek here, it's a dark line. We can see it very clearly here. So we can kind of start to put in those in a more solid way. It gives us an anchor to work from. There's no tone whatsoever, but I'm drawing around the edges of tone. So if you look, we've got a line here where the direction of the face changes. I've just shown that as a line at the minute. There's no tonal areas. They're all just edges of forms at the moment. So that's all I'm sticking with at the minute, not shading. We're close to shading, but we're keeping it until a little bit later. All the way through the drawing, it's a constant process of checking, moving things. If they need to move, they've got to move. There's times when you stand back and you realize something is really askew. Another way of checking it, and it's painful, but you've just got to move it because the whole drawing relies on that. I used to say in classes, ABC, always be checking. It's just a continual process. You never stop. I'm coming to the stage now where I'm fairly happy about the position of everything, and I can now start putting in the shading. But sometimes when you put in the shading, it reveals inaccuracies. Even when you get to that point, you're not just kind of coloring in, you're still checking. It's an essential part of it. It's the kind of integrity of the drawing that you do that all the time. So if I look at the corner of the nostril, if I go up, straight up, I get to the corner of the eye. So just make sure that's all in the right place. If I go across from the corner of this eye, I see that it's slightly below the other one because the head is slightly tilted. So if I look across, I want this point here to be below this one here. It's kind of, this might need to move up a little bit. So I'm doing that everywhere, not just with the eyes. I'm doing that all around the face. Any kind of salient point, I make sure that it's in the right position, north, south, east, west. I'm pretty happy that everything is in roughly the right place. It's a kind of a freeing moment because you've put in this hard work and you've been taking it slow, and you can kind of be quite confident that the drawing isn't going to go badly wrong. I can kind of loosen up at this point and start shading in quite a loose way because I've got that really strong structure to work with. This is one of the tools I use most of all in the studio. I find it completely essential. Just looking in the mirror, if there's something wrong with the drawing and I'm not too sure what it is, often when you stand back, look in the mirror, it kind of jumps out at you. You see it for the first time. So when I stand back and look, I can see that there are elements around here which aren't quite right, that maybe need to be lower. The proportion from here to here, I need to check because it looks smaller, but we'll give that a check. It's a very, very quick tool to help you see deficiencies in your drawing, especially proportion-wise, angles. It just really, you see the drawing for the first time, especially when you've been working on it for a long time, you've got very close to it. It just, yeah, it gives you a fresh eye. So the charcoal I've been using is very, very soft. So it's perfect for the start of a drawing because it's easy to move around. It produces a nice soft line. But at this point, just because we're getting into the detail, this particular charcoal goes blunt faster, so it doesn't hold its point so well. So I'm going to change over to a slightly harder charcoal so that I'm into the shading part of it and bits of detail with it that I want to be more precise. So I'm going to swap to one which is harder and keeps its tip for longer. Same material, not sure how they do it, but it's still vine charcoal, but it's just a harder version. It's not so hard that it can't draw on paper, but it just keeps its tip longer. At the moment, I'm doing the shading, and some parts of the drawing require darker tones, other require kind of mid-tones, and all really, it depends on the quality of the charcoal for a start. So if it's harder, it tends to be a lighter tone. If it's the softer one, like this one, it tends to be a darker tone, but also pressure. So the places where I want it to be really dark, like say for instance, just in this bit of background here, which will describe this intricate part of the cheek. I want that to be really dark, so I'm just leaning very hard on the charcoal, and it goes almost black, which is what I want in that area. So yeah, it's just a case of pressure. And then up, I would kind of want to be a little bit lighter up at the top, so I'll move to the harder charcoal. And it's just that grip I was talking about earlier on, where you're just holding it very lightly, moving very, very fast, and it just produces a kind of a grey or light grey tone. You can kind of, if you go over it, it kind of fills in that whole area, light grey. And that happens all over the face. There are parts where I need it to be darker, but there are parts in between which are mid-grey, so I want those to be, I'll use the harder charcoal for that, and a bit less pressure. I always have to sharpen the charcoal probably every 5 minutes. The bucket ends up just completely full of charcoal. As we get towards the end of the drawing, I'm trying to make the shadow coherent. So what I mean by that is that at the minute, it's a bit patchy, so there are parts like up here that I need to darken, up here. So that all the shadow on this side is the same tone. That's what I mean by making it coherent. So that makes it believable as something that it's a solid object with light source on it. So it's light on this side and dark on this side. So it's dark on this side of the face. Same as the nose here, that's the same shadow. So I'm at the moment, trying to balance it out to make all those shadows the same tone. Okay, we're going to leave it there for today. Hopefully that's shown you how, with a strong start, you can get a likeness. And remember, check, 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 stand back from your easel, and don't get bogged down in those details too soon. Good luck.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Wendy Barrett, won her heat on Portrait Artist of the Year painting opera singer Nikki Spence.
She's given us a real Scot here.
And you do understand that he's a mountain of a man, even though we're only getting head and shoulders.
In the semi-final, her arresting portrait of former Spice Girl Emma Bunton earned her a place in the final.
Everything is very well balanced. There's not much there, and yet every element sings.
And it was her commissioned portrait of her husband Fred, followed by her portrait of our very own Joan Bakewell.
I love your palette.
You got a little table, put your gin and tonic on it.
Wonderful.
That saw her crowned Portrait Artist of the Year 2023.
Wendy Barrett.
Wendy, great painter with a sensitivity for the human condition, and that combination is just magical. For her winning commission, Wendy produced an ethereal portrait of international conservationist Dr. Jane Goodall
Will you help me unveil it?
for the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, wow.
Well done.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
Wendy paints with realistic tones and enjoys the challenge of painting with a restricted number of colours.
You can get an awful lot of colours just from 2 colours in white. So I'm being economical, environmental.
Which makes her the perfect artist to guide us in today's masterclass, painting with a limited palette.
The limited palette that I'm using today is ultramarine blue, a burnt sienna, and a titanium white. And these 3 colours are ideal for painting portraits. As you can see from this little colour chart that I've done, which you might like to make one as well, these are just 25 of the colours that you can produce using these 3 colours here. You'll notice that there's an orange and there's a blue, and these are opposite colours on the colour wheel, which means that when you mix them in equal measure, they make a really lovely black. And then you've got colours which are becoming desaturated as well. So we've got a whole range of colours we can work from. As I'm going to mix a neutral grey just to draw with, so this could be any colour you like. Now, I'm not going to put in too much detail because this is just so I know where to put my mixes of paint once we start to put paint onto canvas. Okay, so I've now finished my drawing. I've got everything that I need in order to start painting. So minimal amount of marks, but enough information. So I'm going to start mixing colours. But as you can see from the reference, we've got so many colours. So what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to edit it right down to, I think, 5 colours at the most. Obviously, with just these 3 colours, I'm not going to get every colour absolutely exact. And this is the lovely thing about using a limited palette. You've only got 2 choices of colour, so it's either warmer or colder, which leaves you open to think more about important things like tone, saturation, so how bright a colour is or how grey a colour is, and colour temperature. So with the blue and the warm orange, we've automatically got a cold and a warm. So I'm going to start by mixing a colour for the hair, and I've already mixed a black for drawing, and I think that's a pretty good black. So I'm going to make a lot more of it because I'm going to need a big mix to fill that area in. There's quite a large area of hair. So making this layer can be quite quick, really. So you're just trying to cover the canvas. I find it's much easier to start with a mid-tone wash because you're then working from a mid-tone value. So you can work down to your darks and up to your lights. If you work with a white surface, so white is always dominant and it's going to really shout out, so you're always fighting against the white. With a mid-tone, you've already got some paint on the surface, which is a nice thing to start with, but you're just working from that mid-tone, working up and down, so it becomes quite a bit easier. So I'm happy with the blocking for the dark. So I'm now going to start mixing my second colour, which is going to be, I'm going to go for the lightest light. So I've done the darkest dark, and so this is for the area on the forehead and the cheek. I'm not going to go for my absolute highlight, but I just need to make a nice light warm colour, and then I can see how it plays against the dark. So I'm going to start with a white, and I can see straight away that it's veering towards the burnt sienna and not the blue. So I'm going to add a touch of burnt sienna. I'm going to get this to the right tone. Constantly referencing my image. Okay, that's good. So I'm now going to block in this colour into my light areas, really looking at those shapes. So I'm going to pick another brush to use. Get a good lot of paint on my brush, and I'm just going to put that in. You can see it's about the same tone as the background, but it's coming out warmer. So I can see this light area of colour really hits that forehead. The light's coming from here. It travels all the way down the nose. So you're just painting the light. It picks up on Jess's cheekbones and up to the nose. So find a nice brush that you like to use that creates some really nice marks. Okay, I think that's all my light colour. And I can see by looking at the reference and my painting that I'm getting the right sort of contrast. So I'm happy with that colour. I'm now going to go on to mixing my third colour. Okay, so I'm going to mix a shadow colour for the face, which isn't as dark as the hair. It's this colour here that outlines the cheek and comes round under the jaw. So I'm going to mix that colour now. So I'm going to start with the burnt sienna, and I'm just going to add a touch of white. So, you know, add colours to each other quite slowly. Some can be stronger pigments than others. So get used to the paints that you're using and how strong they are. And if you're unsure, just use a little tiny bit at a time. I'm looking to get the right tone. And actually, that's the right sort of tone if I hold that up against the cheek. But I know it's too bright. It's quite a bright orange. So I need to desaturate it, make it greyer. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of blue. OK, so if I look at my colour now and I hold it up to this shadow shape, I can see that I've got the right sort of tone and not far off the right colour, actually. So I've got a nice clean brush and I'm going to start to see where this colour goes. I can see it goes around here. It hasn't got such a sharp edge, but again, that will come in the second layer. But I can do a bit of blending, especially as I've got quite a bit of paint on my brush, so I can give that a nice soft edge. I'm actually going to take this colour all the way down this cheek. The wonder of using a limited palette is that you've only got 2 colours and a white to choose from. You're not overwhelmed by a full palette of colours. This leaves you plenty of time to focus on 3 really important things: the saturation of your colour, the colour temperature, and most importantly, the tone of your colour. It's often said in the painting world that tone does all the work and colour takes all the glory. And that is really true. If you get your tone right, you can really play with your colour. So you may find that your overall wash on your initial painting actually works as a tone. We've actually got a nice pale blue there. So it may be that you leave some of your canvas without any paint on if your background colour matches what you're after. I'm going to mix another black, just so that I've still got that mix. And then I'm going to add a tiny bit of white to get it to the tone that's in the background. I think we're looking at a more bluey background than a warm background. I think we're looking at a cooler background. When you mix your colour, you've got a real black, and it's hard to see the colour bias, the colour temperature. So So a good way of testing that is just to add a little bit of white, and you can instantly see whether it's bluer or warmer. Okay, so I'm now going to block in this background colour. And as you can see, it alters how the dark looks, and it also alters how the light tones on the forehead look. So don't start adjusting your colours before you've put everything on till they're next to each other. Because one colour that's sitting next to another colour, they will affect each other and they'll change their appearance. Hold your nerve. Okay, so I've got my background keyed in, and I'm now going to mix my final colour, which is an olive green colour. And obviously that green's going to be hard to get with the colours I've got. So I'm just going to go for as close a match as I can make it. I can see that it's probably going to be a warmish grey that I'm going to use, but I'm going to go for the tone rather than the actual colour and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to go with that. We've got the blue and we've got a bit of yellow in the burnt sienna, but it's not enough to make a green. So that's going to work tonally, just picking up on the light of Jess's shoulder. It's not necessarily about getting the accurate colour, it's about getting the right tone and the right sort of temperature. So I've got a nice warm grey, it's a warm green. So I've colour matched it as close as I can with the paints I've got. So I've blocked everything in, and we can now see that it's starting to work tonally. And this is the lovely thing about working with a limited palette. I'm dealing mostly with looking at tone and trying to get a closer colour as possible. But you can see it's already working quite effectively. So I'm now ready to go on to my second layer, where I can start to play with the nuances of the colours and the tones and the temperatures. Looking at Jess, I can see I've got some quite dark shadows, so I want to play with the mixes I've got. I've got the colour for the shadow and the colour for the light, and I'm going to mix the two together to create a tone in between, or a colour in between. So mix these colours quite closely on your palette, because you can see how they work, and actually that's starting to look right for this sort of area, and it'll work well for the in-between areas too. When you're using paints, be aware that different brands have different qualities of paint. So you tend to have a student's brand and an artist brand. And you'll see the artist brand costs quite a bit more. And it's usually because they're higher pigmented and they have a much higher tinting properties. So be aware of what you're using, play with what you're using, so you get to know the tinting strength and what they do. Sometimes you'll find that the more expensive artist quality paint can be more economical because you're using less of it. Okay, so we've now finished the painting. It's got to a place where I'm happy with it. We could go further, but I'm just going to leave it where it is. This shows you that you don't need to go out and buy every colour under the sun. You can just pick up 2 colours and a white, squeeze them out on your palette, find someone to sit for you and have really good fun. So go out and enjoy yourself.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor, Phoebe Hicks, took part in Portrait Artist of the Year back in 2017 when she produced a portrait of presenter Sue Perkins that was full of vitality.
What's great about this is many people have said over the years you're no oil painting, and now I can say, well, I beg to differ.
Her contemporary twist on a classic style ensured that she stood out.
That's mind-blowing that they chose me. I can't believe it.
At the semi-final, her portrayal of actor Imelda Staunton was full of narrative and captivated her sitter.
I'm going to go with this painting.
As well as creating beautiful portraits, Phoebe is regularly commissioned to portray animals, which makes her the perfect artist to lead us through today's masterclass, Animal Portraiture.
Today, I'm going to show you how I approach pet portraiture. I think pets are so important in our lives, and they deserve a spot on the wall. When you're starting your portrait, you are going to consider where your proportions are. I have made a few marks before getting started here because it can take time. And to save on that time, I've got my little anchor points, and I will now work from this with a little bit more confidence that these marks are in the right place. I'm going to start with a little outline of the head and a few of the darkest patches. And this is going over the marks that I've already made, just to kind of reaffirm those proportions. This particular paper is a soft pastel card, so it has an ability to hold charcoal very well, and you can get very dark marks on it. So you can have a lovely contrast within your work. I'm starting off by using a very soft charcoal. The particular charcoal I use comes in different hardnesses, so you can work from larger, more expressive marks to the finer detail. But using a soft charcoal at the start means you're not bound by those marks too early on. At this stage of the process, I am only focusing on sort of the landmarks. So I'll be focusing on the size of Jago's ear, and then this is one piece of tone. Same for below his nose. And I want to make sure that I'm thinking of these as big block shapes. I'm not thinking of little details of eyes, of whiskers at this stage. It's very important you're looking at it as a sort of abstract, large block shape. So this is a photograph of my friend's dog, Jago. I haven't drawn Jago before, but I thought he'd be a very good example for today because he includes a little bit of chalk with his very fair fur. And I think it sometimes can be easier to draw dogs with much more structure in their face, but it's very easy to forget the structure when a dog is as fluffy as one like Jago. So this stage is quite messy, and the marks I'm making are deliberate, but they're not overthought. For now, I'm just thinking of huge marks, tone, and eventually the light that I will isolate on his face. So at this stage, I'm going to brush the charcoal into the paper. This can take a lot of charcoal off, so marks that look quite dark are going to get a lot lighter, and it can even take some of the charcoal off totally. So I'm going to be brushing in these lighter areas, which I will then mark out in more deliberate shapes using the rubber. But for now, I want to have nearly every bit of the paper brushed. So like I've considered every bit of the drawing, even the areas I haven't put charcoal, I've considered what shape that might be. So a lot of the photograph of Jago has very similar tones, particularly in this lighter shadow area. That will be the most complicated area to work on because it's so subtle. Yet our focus is always going to want to be on his nose because that's where you look first. We're going to look at his nose and his eyes. But I'll continue to consider all the areas throughout. You don't want to put too much focus on one area and start just there and then work your way out, because then if proportions are off, it can start to make the head not feel like a whole head, which is the most important thing. You want everything to feel whole. So I'm beginning to find more detail again, having brushed out the majority of the charcoal. And I'm going to be looking for the big shapes. So this particular mark underneath Jago's eyebrow, I think, is really key. I think his eyebrows are a very distinctive feature of his. And once I've sort of decided that shape, so roughly where it sits, I'll also think of other shapes of that similar tone. And when I say tone, I mean, if you were to make it a black and white photograph, it would be the same shade or darkness of grey. So now I'll focus more in the dark areas of his beard, and this is a very distinctive area because it's of high contrast. So it's working out all the relationships throughout the drawing, and contrast is a really key element, because if you have too high contrast in too many places, your eye is going to be confused. Usually when we look at someone, we're not seeing their whole face in definition. That's what makes this a portrait, not a photograph. So we want to have that area of focus that we choose, we've decided, because we're looking at the eyes and the nose, and we're in control of where the viewer is looking. I feel I've got a good amount of charcoal. I've blended various areas in. We have a few more distinctive marks down here that I probably will eventually blend in. Sometimes, instead of blending in with the brush, this is a small hog bristle brush, I will go on to using a harder charcoal. This can push the softer charcoal around, as well as putting on a lighter tone. But at this stage, I'm now going to think a little bit about moulding the light. So I'm going to focus on the top of his nose and around his eyebrows. And I have my trusty, very, very old rubber. It was not this colour to start, but this is the only one I like. I hold it pretty much throughout drawing, so it gets nice and warm. The only thing I have to be careful about is that it can make my fingers sticky, and you need to be careful touching your paper. Now, though, with my rubber, I'm going to just pull out a few marks. So I'm working between his eyebrows on this lovely shape. It's really helpful to give shapes a kind of different, more abstract approach. So between his eyebrows, I'm almost thinking of this as like a flame, the shape of a flame there. And over here, I feel like this little one is a wave. So I'm not thinking about just the shape between his eyebrows. I'm thinking of how is the flame licking between his eyes. And so it makes you stop thinking about just drawing the dog. You're thinking about drawing that specific shape, because all of these specific shapes make Jago look like Jago, and that's what we want to create. I also prefer, earlier on in the drawing, to identify my lightest spot, which I think in this case is usually the nice dollop on the end of the nose, but nice little wet highlight. So this is a chalk pencil. It's not like a pastel chalk in a sense that it's very, very soft and will bleed very, very easily when smudged, will smudge very, very easily. It's a little waxier, and so you can't play around with it as much. You can put it down, brush it in, and use the rubber to work it in. So now I've established where my little highlight's going to be. I will eventually put one in the eye. In plenty of cases, a portrait of a dog, I find the highlight on the end of the nose is the character, where often, particularly with a shaggy dog, you know, eyes can be covered by lovely big hairy eyebrows. So you don't have to get too caught up on wanting that highlight in the eye to bring them to life, make them look wet and wonderful. So I'm going to leave that later. And the more you have down, the more proportions you have established, the easier it is to see all the different relationships and where you want to put those marks. I've made a few marks now that I'm going to push on with where I like to include some more distinctive, characterful markings. So up here, I've created a few marks, as I usually would with charcoal, but with the chalk on the areas that the light is hitting him from the side. I've taken a little moment to just step back from the portrait. But by stepping back, I've noticed that Jago very much looks like a floating head at this stage. So I will want to put a little definition in of his shoulders. In this photograph, Jago's lying down, and I'm not going to put the lines to define that, but I can see that there's an idea of this might be where his shoulder blade is. And so I might create more of an effect of if he was sitting down rather than lying down. So I'm going to use more of a chisel shape. And it's worth being more confident with these lines, as you don't want to really make them more than once. In this case, Jago's collar is quite well hidden by his fur. In most portraits, it's usually where I would finish, where I'm making all of my more defined drawing. I might give him a bit more of a suggestion of a collar in this. And in the scenario, you might want to sometimes include the tag, write their name or something like that. I'm going to leave it like this for the moment, because I'm going to see how the rest of the drawing forms before making that choice. Putting the highlight in the eye, I'm going to pull it off with the rubber, and this gives me a little clean spot to place the chalk. Sometimes, and actually I'm sort of wondering about it now, because there is so much contrast between the dark and the light, just having the paper colour there with no charcoal on is light enough. So I'm actually going to leave that for the moment. It's a very different thing with painting and drawing faces to pets, is that the pet is constantly changing planes when they've got lots of fur like this. But the nose is one area of definition, the tip of the nose, and obviously going up the bridge of the nose. So this is an area where I need to think more of the bone structure underneath there, as there isn't any evidence of his bone structure anywhere else, maybe apart from his brow a little bit. So that's why it can be important to find the definition in the fur as well. I think the main thing I'm trying to capture with the portrait is not only a likeness, but a sense of that character that our pets have. And pet portraiture, such an important aspect of it, is capturing the character. You're not just capturing the dog, the fur, the wet nose. There's life there. And again, pets live with us through so much and are so important. I have a terrier who's seen me through plenty, and I just think that when you see that likeness in a portrait of them, it is so moving and means so much that, yeah, there's a lot of importance in that to me. I think with this, we've got to a stage where I would start to add a few more accents of charcoal just to give it a bit more personality. But I'll move around the drawing and decide what I think needs a little extra flair. It may be a little contrast. It may be a way to describe a little more of the feeling. But I don't want to add so many that they then lose their playfulness, and then that then becomes the look of the drawing. I only want to add them so that they are little touches rather than the full description. So I think I'm happy with where the drawing's at with Jago, and I'll look at it again after a bit of a rest and see if there's anything else that catches my eye. But usually it's good to just have that break. I hope some things that I've mentioned have been useful and that you can take them home and apply them yourself. But yeah, give it a go and good luck.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Today's tutor is professional artist Claire Lord, who took part in Landscape Artist of the Year in 2020, where her composition of West Wickham Park caught our eye.
She's raised this inconsequential section of the house into this sort of monolithic being, almost. It is really beautifully done.
In the semi-final, she took on London's Olympic Park.
She goes right in there and finds those bold forms and that rich colour,
earning her a coveted place in the final.
The second artist is Claire Lord.
She impressed us with her commissioned landscape of Kew Gardens.
It's absolutely magical.
The movement is phenomenal in that water, just inspired.
And her depiction of Trinity Buoy Wharf at the final completed her journey in the competition.
A really dynamic, strong landscape.
When she's not getting out in the elements, Claire is an expert at painting everyday objects and flowers. She'll be teaching us how she does it in today's masterclass, Introduction to Still Life.
Today we're going to be looking at the business of still life. The still life is an excellent genre for exploring artistic choice. Those choices are fundamental to us as artists in expressing ourselves and saying what we want to say about what we've put together. To start with, we would choose the objects, then we'd choose what we'd put behind them, below them, And very, very importantly, we'd think about the composition, a fundamental part of all painting. Let's start with choosing the objects. I brought a selection of objects of different colours and heights and sizes. One of the things I was thinking about when I brought these objects today was bringing objects of different primary colours, which is particularly why I put this yellow in, and the blue as well, which I always like. But if you look against the yellow against the green, because, of course, yellow and blue make green, it makes quite an interesting mixture of the three together. But even more powerfully, look at the reflection in the bottle and how actually the yellowy green shows through in the bottle there. One of the artists I've most liked all my life is Cézanne. And prior to doing this session, I was looking at some of his amazing still lifes. I noticed how he uses a pale fabric to wind between things, because then the colour of the objects reflects into the fabric and you get really subtle, beautiful sort of shadowy colours. So to that end, I brought this guy, and I'm going to try squeezing that round somehow. The thing now that makes a big difference with a still life is how it's lit. I've already got quite a nice, subtle shadow behind it. You can see here. I think I could increase that by putting extra light on. I think I'm happy with that now. What we're going to do next is use a viewfinder to help us realise our intention. In other words, to help us make a two-dimensional version of this three-dimensional arrangement that we've made all these choices about. And I use a viewfinder for that because it enables you to make a quick plan that stops you having to do a lot of intricate drawing and messing about on the canvas. This is what it looks like. When you're using a viewfinder and you're going to be working on a canvas, it's essential that the viewfinder has the same proportions as the canvas. Otherwise, there's no good making a plan that's 3 by 2 for a canvas that's 4 by 3. So you draw around the viewfinder, around the inside of it, and make the marks where the thirds and quarters are, just onto the piece of paper. And then you hold the viewfinder up and you close one eye and you move in and out until you get a composition that you like. OK, looking through this, I'm liking this arrangement, this composition. And what I do first is look where the horizon line is. And I make a quick note of that on this sketch. And it's halfway between the half and the quarter. So I'm not going to be doing a drawing. This is like a map. That's as much as I need to do in terms... It's not about doing a beautiful drawing, it's a plan. It's like a map, and it will enable me, which I'm going to show you next, to map this out on here using paint and to know roughly where things are going to go. OK, we're ready to get started on the painting now. It might seem quite a long process to have got here, but a really important one, because we now know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the next thing is to just check out some of the basics to do with using oil paint. And I use 3 yellows, 3 reds and 3 blues, as well as this colour Viridian, which is a really deep green. And the reason I choose that, it's the only secondary colour I use, is that I'm able to mix very dark tones of all different hues using Viridian, alizarin crimson and French ultramarine in different amounts. The next job is to map this out onto here, and to do that I use a thin mix, usually of a tertiary colour, i.e. one of each primary. I'm going to use a bit of alizarin crimson. I make a very wet mix for this because quite often I have to change it, and it makes it easy to rag it out and to move it around. That's a bit too red. And I'm going to use this guy to help me know where everything goes. OK, I know the top of this bottle's here. I do a central line. Yeah, this is a good example of things not being in quite the right place. When I'm correcting something, I quite often make a slightly different colour mix, so I know that this is the right line and The other one was the wrong one. So this is more blue, as you can see. One of the reasons I like standing at an easel rather than sitting is that my hand doesn't have to rest on the canvas, and I can use gravity to make a straight line going downwards. So my hand literally just drops down, if you watch here. I tend to make more tentative marks if I'm resting my hand. When it comes to drawing, which this is, it's still about seeing it. And quite often, I think we look just at the objects and not enough at the spaces between the objects to help us draw them. And one of the most useful things here, while I'm drawing these apples and so on, is that the cloth sort of defines them. So if I look at the shape of the cloth here, the curve of the cloth, and how that goes around there and across there, then I can find the place of the apple sitting on top of it. And then make sure I realise my intention by getting the corner of this in the corner of my canvas. I'm nearly there now, so important thing to do is put this down and stand back from it and see if I like it. Because the great thing with oil paint is you can change it. You can use this guy to rag it out, to move it around. Right, we're ready to get started now with actually putting the paint on. Now, with oil paint, you work dark to light. And there isn't a rule about whether you should paint the background first or the objects first or the... people do it differently. I prefer to start with the background. The reason behind that is that the way colour looks when I look at this blue is affected by it being next to a red or being next to a purple or being next to a pale greeny blue colour. So in order to get the colours of my bottles and fruit right, I start by putting the background colours in because that enables me to get the relativity of the colour right, well, as right as I can. I'm starting with the dark bits, darkest bits over this side, but I think when I get to do this side, I might add a bit more of a pinky hue into it, and certainly some white as well. But I start with the darks, so I'm going to go for it now. When you're painting and you're mixing the colours and so on, what you have to look for is the shape of the area that you're working on. So with something that's basically flat, if there's nothing on there, it would just be a flat piece of purple cloth, wouldn't it? So I'm not describing the form of it, I'm describing the shape of the shadows, and I have to look at that shape and how it works around the other things. Right, it's time to do the next step up in terms of working dark to light. Whenever I can, I use as big a brush as possible for what I'm painting. What I quite often think is if I'm going to do one mark with my brush, I'd like it to be the brush that's the right width for that one mark. Where I've made this shadow here, behind the bottle, with this quite big brush, if I press hard, it makes a mark that's about that size. In other words, a mark that's the same size as what I'm painting. So when you've got a big brush, it stops you going dab, 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 dab to fill something in, but it enables you to make one mark like that. One of the things you'll notice, as the painting goes on, I get more and more brushes in my hand because I have one brush for each colour. So by the time I get to the end, I've usually got 20 brushes in my hand, which is why it gets covered all over the place. Right, background's fairly completed. I'll check they're right after I've done the rest of the objects. I'm going to start with the dark green bottle now. And again, it's about thinking about what sort of hue it is. Looking at it, I think it's probably French ultramarine again, maybe with lemon yellow. So I'm going to start by making a good thick mix of the darkest tone I can see. And then I will add more lemon yellow to make the lighter tones and so on. And I would resist using white, actually, because the white, if you add white into it, it doesn't actually make a lighter hue. It makes a more pastel-y hue, which when you're painting glass, isn't really what you're looking for. So we'll have a go, possibly, at using the rag to drag out some of the paint to see if that will create the very brightest lights. As I said before, I try and use quite a big brush, and partly because it carries a good amount of paint, which is great. But although this is a big brush, because I particularly like these flat-ended ones, because if you look at the end, it's got quite a delicate single line of bristles at the end, which enable you to pull it down and make quite a fine line. I've got most of the green paint on the bottle now. I started with the dark and then medium and then some lighter colours. There's quite a lot of different colours in there because of all the reflections going on. But I'm just going to go in with the rag now. I wanted to show you how it works. Basically, any old T-shirt will do fine. And then you create a tool by putting your finger through the end like that, so as you've got the contact space. And then you put your finger in the Sansador, which I use to make the paint thinner. I prefer Sansador because it's not as smelly as turpentine. So just dunk it in there like that. And then I'm going to look where the lightest bits are on the bottle and try and drag them out. So there's here. And the same as with the brush, where I try and do one movement. I try and do one movement with my finger as well. I'm literally just looking at the shape of the light bits and pulling that shape out. And then having dragged some of things out, you then go back in again with the paint. Doing a still life is probably the equivalent of playing the scales a lot when you're learning to play the piano. It's an absolutely fantastic, real practice of all the skills that underpin all aspects of painting. And you're in control of it, and it's from life. And I think the fact that you are looking, it's that see it, mix it, use it, that you're looking from life, and it's, you know, it's the challenge of it, will really help you develop your painting skills. There are no rules about what you can or can't include in a still life. It's all about reflecting your choices and doing what intrigues, interests, or amuses you. It can be anything. Back in the day, it was more traditional, but nowadays, I think it's all about choosing objects, choosing ones that you like the colour of, the shape, and actually, the story that they tell, in a way. So as I'm working into this ground cloth, I'm using the same strategy I used earlier. I'm working dark to light. I'm working from thinner to thicker paint and with as fewer brush strokes as possible. There's always a time to stand back from your canvas and have a look, see how things are going. And I think now's that moment, So there's obviously a lot still to do, but one thing that stands out for me is that much as I love this shadow in the background, I think it's too dark. It looks a bit like a ghost haunting the back of the still life. So I'm just going to rag a bit out. It's time to move on to the blue bottle now. It's a very intriguing blue, I think, particularly because of the things behind it and beneath it. And one of the ways to help me find out which blue I should use for my mix is using a colour chart. I've got a little one here with actually more than just the 3 blues that I'm using today on. And when I hold it up against it, I quite often close one eye. I don't know why that helps me see, but it seems to. And it's about trying to decide which of those it mostly is. The cerulean blue's the top line, and I think you can see that that's certainly the light that's coming through the thinner glass at the top is closer to that, whereas these dark blues further down are more like the French ultramarine at the bottom, so maybe I'm going to need more than one blue for this. But the same thing again, start with the darkest hue, and that will mean I'm starting down here. I'm going to do the lemon next, and perhaps naively I thought, oh, it'll be lemon yellow. But when I actually look at it, I'm not sure it is. I think it's got a warmer tone to it, which might mean I need to use some cadmium yellow in there to warm it up a bit, and to use just the lemon yellow on its own where it's lightest to show the differences. As I start to paint the red of the apples, I remember what my initial choices were all about, which was putting together these quite dynamic primary colours. So having done the lemon and cadmium yellow lemon, I'm now moving on to the red, and the dynamic between the red and the blue here at the front is exactly what I was after. In fact, I can tell it's working because it makes me go goose pimply. And it's just that vibrancy between the two colours that excites me. I think that the biggest challenge of doing art, well, enjoying it is the biggest challenge. So you have to take the pressure off yourself, and it has to be about the process, not the final thing. But I do think that the biggest challenge is seeing and just looking. And once you start doing it, it will so change how you look at the world. When you get towards the end of a painting, you realise how important that first decision was to get yourself a good big palette. Because if you look back here now, I've actually moved out onto the second one at the back because of all the different mixes. You can see the journey of the paint mixing, how the actual application of the paint works from the darkest mix, which was here when I started with the cloth at the bottom, through to the lightest mix here, which interestingly also has been used in the reflection in the bottles because, of course, it's behind the bottles. So it is coming through to some extent. So again, it's a bit like creating a dictionary of words that you can use in a poem. All these puddles of paint fall into the composition. I think I'm nearly there. I could probably work on it for another couple of hours, but certainly getting there. Still life is an excellent genre and a smashing way to explore everything to do with painting. I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and I thoroughly recommend that you have a go at home.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv. Our tutor today is Finn Campbell-Notman, who entered Landscape Artist of the Year in 2022. He won his heat with his depiction of Blackpool Beach.
He made very good decisions early on and then really made us think. That's an artist who wants to tell stories, and it's an artist we're really interested in.
At the Thames Barrier for the semi-final, Finn once again produced a painting rich with narrative.
My goodness, I'm way off on my journey down the estuary on that wonderful boat. It's beautifully put together, so that just takes me off away to another land.
In the Welsh village of Portmeirion, he was declared Landscape Artist of the Year.
Finn Campbell-Notman.
His £10,000 prize commission for Royal Museums Greenwich was a seascape inspired by 17th century Dutch maritime artists, the Van de Velders.
That's good, well done. Thank you very much.
In Finn's evocative landscapes, composition is key.
I think if you get the bones of a painting correct, then you can start to push and pull.
Which is why he is perfectly suited to leading today's masterclass, composition in landscapes.
Today, I'm going to be showing you how I approach composing an English landscape in a very classic way to depict a very romantic English country scene. This composition is of somewhere that's very local to me. It's called Duncliffe Wood. I've been numerous times. It's a cloudy day, but it's a bright autumn day. We've just been for a long walk. And so the scene, how I've constructed it, is sort of like a memory. Because I've been there several times, I recall different aspects of the landscape, and I wanted to get all of that into one picture. You can see that from my Photoshop file, which is how I compose from various photographs, I've spent quite a lot of time putting together this composition from maybe up to 20 photographs. And then once I've got everything as I want it, I then put a grid over this file, and then I transfer it onto the canvas on a 10-centimeter square. So to begin with, bit of raw umber, quite thin. And this tree on the left, we're just going to very loosely, we don't have to be accurate, we just want to kind of get the lines in. In terms of composition, this is a device that I've used sometimes, particularly with landscape, and this goes back to very classical composition within landscape. We kind of like to frame the view, and what that does, it sort of contains our peripheral vision. So when we look out onto the world, we're looking with our eyes, obviously, but on a canvas, we have 4 corners. And that defines what we're looking at. This tree and these darker trees that I'll put in a moment, they're performing the same function. They're sort of concentrating our view into the composition. So rather than looking at a painting, we're going to be looking into a landscape. Generally, when we have a rectangular canvas, we divide it into 3 parts. That's both vertically and horizontally. We tend to want to focus on one element, and all of the rest of the elements sort of are in support of that. So here, this clump of trees, you can see that, and obviously I'll come back and make them a little bit more refined later, but we're just sort of getting a feel of where things are within the frame. You can see that this is roughly, so if we take that measurement for the short side, it forms a square roughly there, and that's 1/3. The same goes for this side. And so our focus is occurring on the third horizontally, but it's also occurring roughly on the third vertically. So this intersection right here is where I wanted the focus to be. Now, obviously there are 3 other intersections, and I'll show you why I've put the tree on the right with these branches coming in. Again, this is very rough when we come back and refine it later. But this branch form, I've actually edited and altered the branches so that they do what I want them to do in terms of the composition. All of this form here, once I fill it in, is going to be occurring on the vertical and on the horizontal third. And another element of composition is that we have what's called a Rembrandt triangle. It's elements which contain the way the eye travels around the painting when it looks at it. So we have, if you see, 1, 2, 3 that are forming a triangle here. And in that triangle, in that negative space, our eye travels into the painting and into the distance, because we want the viewer to look into the painting and into the landscape rather than at the surface of the painting. So I'm going to dash in all of these elements very loosely, because we just want to see those shapes. Now, Obviously, these trees are going to be green at some point, but I'm using very thinned raw umber because it's the fastest drying pigment. And when it's very thin, we can make these marks and we don't have to worry about the drying time because it will dry very fast. We can then work over it fairly soon afterwards. I use photo editing. I'm more of a studio painter, but it doesn't mean that I don't spend a lot of time outside. I do. I use my phone, I take a lot of photographs, and then it's a lot of editing, going through photographs, finding bits. Sometimes when I'm composing, there'll be an element that I kind of think that the picture needs. And so I have this store of tens of thousands of photographs, and I can go back and I can find, oh yeah, that day, that tree, and I can put it into the composition to see if it works. A lot of people, part of their painting process is really to be outside. So if you are a plein air painter, then you're kind of doing the editing and the composition parts that I will do back in the studio on a photo editing program. So now I've got the sort of an indication of the large areas of mass and the focal point. I'm now going to go in and do sort of the secondary parts of the composition, which is this very sort of geometric, linear set of receding fields. One of the elements of composition is line and how these head shapes are going to lead the eye in from left to right. And once we get a little bit further, we've got some indications of sort of a curve that comes in back from right to left. So the lines are keeping our eye circulating within the composition. So I spend quite a lot of time composing, and, you know, this reference may have taken me up to a week to make. Once I have the grid, I draw the grid onto the canvas, and that will take maybe 3 or 4 hours. And I do that because, in a very simple way, it allows me just to get on with the painting. I'm just trying to capture what I felt on the day, and all of these ways of working help me to do that. So after putting in these more structural elements, we can sort of see the skeleton of the piece, if you like, the bones of it. Instinctively, you want to move, or at least I do, I want to move to seeing some of the larger sort of masses in the negative space between these positive masses of the dark trees. So I'm just dashing in the blue of the sky. And what you'll see is that because I've got the warm ground on the canvas, it all looks very closely toned. And at this stage, we're not really worried about getting the paint colours right or the tonal values absolutely correct. Just very quickly getting an idea of some of the main elements of the sky. I'm not entirely certain if these little branches coming in are entirely necessary. I'm just going to quickly put them in because I do feel like they helped just reinforce that forcing the eye into the picture, because there are so many elements that are diagonal from left to right. Unless we have an element that sort of reinforces the eye travelling back from right to left, then the eye might wander off the side of the right hand of the canvas. So I'm just going to put these in. And hopefully you'll see how actually they really work, because what they're doing is they're echoing these more kind of graphic linear elements. So this is very nice. We can see these curves here are echoed by these curves here. They're then complemented by the curves in the landscape, this one coming up around here. So we're getting some very nice movement all the way through. in this composition, we're going to have quite an intense green on this field, but that's the only area where it's going to be that intense in terms of the saturation of the colour. All of the rest, and this is again a compositional element, I want to tone it back. So we can use colour and tonality, whether things are dark and light, to reinforce elements of the composition. Now, the English landscape in particular, it's almost a composition in and of itself because, apart from a few pockets here and there, it's a very constructed and managed landscape and has been for thousands of years, or at least since the Saxons. So all of these hedgerows, all of these elements that we're so incredibly familiar with, have actually been put there in a sort of planned way. So as a landscape painter, acknowledging that and using them within our own painting, we're sort of making a composition upon a composition. I'm just going to begin to put the clouds in. I'm going to, as usual, work from dark to light, so I'm going to put in the shadows first, just to get a sense of where these shapes are occurring. That looks a little bit dark, but it doesn't matter. We're just trying to get a sense of where we are. And switch to a big soft brush. Just get these in, just to get the idea of where the light is hitting these clouds. Now, it may not look like much at the moment, but just by putting that in, we can see that two of the main elements of this composition are this very sort of intense dark here and this very diffuse light there. And that sort of juxtaposition between the two is a key to the focus of the painting. These fields are really key to giving us a sense of where we are. We're in a very classic English landscape here, and so we're going to have to get our greens looking really good. So we've got the clouds here, and the direction of the light from the sun is from top left, and it's a cloudy day, so we're getting these nice bright patches between the clouds shining on the fields. And so with the shapes of the hedges and these green shapes, we're kind of showing the kind of day that it is. And these look incredibly acid bright, and of course, as we go on, I'll adjust the tonality and colour. Now I've put some of these greens in, I'm going to go back into the hedge lines and the trees, some of the very much darker elements. So just using a very large brush to kind of rough these in very loosely, not worrying about the brushwork at this stage. We're just putting in areas using a much darker version of the greens I used below, and just dashing these sort of leaf shapes. I'm a realistic painter, I'm not an impressionist, but at this stage of every painting, I'm just getting an idea of what things are and where they are. I'm now using sort of correct colours, so the greens that I use, I've found a French manufacturer makes this colour called sepia, or sepia. It's somewhere between a brown and a green, and it's actually made from squid ink, so when you put it on the palette, it smells of seafood. But it is such a nice warm green, so I think what I should do now is a little bit of sort of painting by numbers, just getting all of the ground covered so that we don't have any of it showing through. I'm really quite happy with how this is sort of come to some measure of resolution because I have the structure so well. I've been very loose with my brush strokes. However, that sort of leads me into another element of composition which we can use, both through the shapes, the interchange, the various elements of composition, the rhythm, the lines, to reinforce that sense of sort of sparkle and vivacity. We can work back into these trees and these grasses using sort of fairly directional brush strokes. So I know these are oak trees. It doesn't really matter because this sort of rhythmic brush stroke is just sort of another layer building upon the sort of framework, then the larger elements. And again, this directional brush stroke is reinforcing our attention down onto the focus of the picture, which is this otherwise fairly inconsequential clump of trees. Now, traditionally, what we would have in this composition is a shepherd, roughly about here, and maybe some indication of sheep or cattle. But I'm not particularly interested in composition in that way, and so the figure within this landscape is this clump of trees. It has a personality. And so having this element here, and again, I will pay quite a lot of attention to this to make sure that as our focus within the painting, it really works as our representative in the landscape. Time for clouds and the sky. So overall, I'm really quite happy with how this is now beginning to work. I've dashed in the sky very, very loosely. The brushwork of the foreground is also very loose. But I can, with an overall sense, now I can begin to see which parts of it need attention. Personally, to my taste, this area right here feels a little bit brassy and a bit oversaturated and bright. However, it may be that the sky needs to darken. So those sorts of adjustments, you know, once I've got the composition fully on the canvas, then you can begin to move forward and refine things and just make it feel a bit more naturalistic. As a composition, very happy with it. As a finished painting, obviously it needs a lot more work, but I have achieved really what I wanted to, which was to show you through the demonstration of the elements of composition how we can express that interface between what the landscape gives to us and what we bring to the landscape. A good painting is, quite often it's the equilibrium between those two poles of what you bring to the landscape and what the landscape says to you. Hope you found this helpful and enjoyable as much as I found it enjoyable. Good luck with your painting.
If you'd like to find out more about these masterclasses, go onto our website, skyartsartistoftheyear.tv.